She pushed her shoulder against the front door, and it gave way with a tired groan, letting in a slice of icy air from the porch. Hannah Price still smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee from the hospital break room. Her scrubs were damp at the cuffs. Her hair was pinned up in a messy knot that had been slipping since 3 a.m. Inside the little duplex in Vermilion, Ohio, the house should have been quiet. Instead, there was a sound like someone scraping fingernails along wood, a muffled thud. Then a hoarse, desperate cough. Hannah froze with her lunch bag still hanging from her wrist. "Dad?" she called, voice cracking. No answer. Just that scraping again, slower now, like the person making it was running out of strength. She stepped into the narrow hallway. The heat was too high, but the air still felt cold, like the cold lived inside the walls. A sour smell drifted out from the back of the house. Old sweat, urine, something gone wrong. The door to the spare room, the one they used to store Christmas decorations and Frank's old toolboxes, was shut. A thick padlock hung from a hasp screwed into the frame. New wood. Fresh screws. Someone had installed it recently. Hannah's stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor tilted. "Dad!" she shouted, pounding the door. From behind it came a faint, broken sound. Not words. More like a breath being forced through a throat that didn't want to give up yet. Then 3 taps. Weak. Unsteady. Hannah pressed her ear to the door. "Dad, it's me." "Hannah, I'm here." A whisper leaked through the crack. Don't let him." "Take it." "Take what?" Hannah's fingers shook as she grabbed the padlock and yanked. It didn't budge. The metal was ice cold and solid. The screws held. She ran to the kitchen drawer, the one with the junk, batteries, rubber bands, a stubby screwdriver. She grabbed the screwdriver and started working the screws like a woman trying to dig someone out of a grave. Her hands slipped. The screwdriver skidded. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her lip. Behind the door, her father coughed again. A long, wet cough that ended with a choking gasp. Hannah's mind flashed through worst-case images: stroke, heart attack, hypothermia, starvation. Her father was 78. He'd been proud enough to refuse help when he should have taken it. But he'd never, ever locked himself away. Someone did this to him. She ripped at the screws until one finally loosened. The hasp wobbled. She kicked the door with her heel, once, twice, until the wood split near the latch. "Dad!" she screamed and shoved. The door swung inward and the smell hit her so hard she gagged. Frank Price was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up like a child. His gray hair was matted. His face was hollow. A bruise purpled along his cheekbone. His lips were cracked and white. A paper plate lay upside down near him, empty. A plastic bottle, crushed, had maybe a finger of water left. His eyes lifted to her like he didn't trust what he was seeing. "Hannah," he rasped. She dropped to her knees and grabbed his shoulders. He was hot to the touch and trembling under his thin sweatshirt. "Oh my God. Oh my God, Dad." He tried to sit up straighter, like he still needed to look strong in front of his daughter even now. But his arms shook and he sagged. And that's when she saw it. His right hand was clenched tight against his chest. Between his fingers was the corner of an envelope. Old. Yellowed. Like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The flap was sealed with a piece of tape that had lost its stick. He was hiding it. Protecting it. "Dad, what is that?" she whispered. His eyes darted, terrified, to the crack in the door, as if someone might be listening from the hallway. "Promise me," he said, each word scraping out of him. "Promise me you won't. Leave me. Not again." Her throat burned. She swallowed. "I'm not going anywhere. I swear. I'll never abandon you." A sound came from the front of the house then. A heavy footstep on the porch. The front door handle rattled once, like someone testing it. Hannah's heart stopped. Frank's eyes went wide. "He's back," he whispered. Hannah clutched the envelope and pulled it gently from Frank's fist. Her fingers brushed his skin and felt how thin he'd gotten. Her mind went cold and clear, the way it did in emergencies at the hospital. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, keeping her voice low. "My father's been locked in a room. There's someone outside right now. Please send police." The line connected. A dispatcher answered. Hannah started to speak. and then the doorknob turned. If you've ever had that moment where you realize the worst thing you can imagine is not only possible, but already happening, then you know what Hannah felt in that second. Stay with me, because what she discovers about who did this, and why, leads to a truth buried for decades, and it changes everything. But before I tell you what happens when the police arrive and what that old letter really means, we have to rewind. Because this didn't start with a padlock. It started with a night shift, a missed call, and a small town where everyone thinks they know your family, until they don't. And that was the moment she realized the real story was sitting in her purse, sealed and dangerous. Hannah had been working nights at Mercy Health's community hospital over in Lorain County for almost 2 years, ever since the bills started piling up and Frank's pension stopped stretching the way it used to. Night shift wasn't glamorous. It was fluorescent lights and tired faces and the constant beep of monitors. It was cleaning bedpans at 2 a.m. and holding strangers' hands while they cried for people who weren't coming. But it paid a little more, and it kept her moving. If she stopped moving, she thought too much about what she'd done. She'd moved out 5 years ago after a blowout fight with Frank over her ex-husband, over money, over pride. She'd told herself she needed space, that she was building a life, that Frank was stubborn and would be fine. Then Frank fell on the ice and cracked 2 ribs. A neighbor called her. Hannah drove back to Vermilion in a panic and found her father sitting on the couch, pretending he wasn't in pain, pretending he didn't need her. The guilt hit her so hard she could barely breathe. That was the day she moved back in. Not because it was easy, not because it made her feel good, because it felt like the only way to make up for the years she'd been gone. "Just until you're steady," she told him. Frank had smiled like he'd won something. "I'm steady," he'd said. "You're the one that looks like she's about to fall over." That was Frank. Warm, talkative, proud, the kind of man who called everyone kid even when they were 40, the kind of man who brought donuts to the volunteer firehouse and still fixed neighbors' lawn mowers for free. At least, that's who he'd been before the last 6 months. Lately, he'd been quieter. He stopped going to the lakefront diner on Saturdays. He stopped teasing Hannah about her coffee addiction. He started keeping the curtains closed, even on sunny days. And he started missing her calls. Hannah's phone showed 3 missed calls from Frank the night before, all around 1:17 a.m. Her stomach had twisted when she saw them during a quick break between patients, but the unit was short-staffed, and by the time she tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. She had told herself it was nothing. Maybe he'd fallen asleep with the phone in his hand. Maybe the battery died. Maybe he was embarrassed that he'd called her too much. She was still telling herself that when she pulled into the driveway after her shift, the sun just starting to smear pale light across the snowy street. Frank's old pickup was gone. The porch light was off, and the front window curtain, the one Frank always left open so he could watch for Hannah's car, was closed tight. She sat in the driver's seat for a second, staring at the house like it belonged to someone else. Then she got out, boots crunching on icy gravel, and tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the thermostat was turned up high, but the house felt empty. No radio playing low. No smell of toast. No "morning, kid." She called again. "Dad?" Silence. She walked room to room. The living room couch was stripped, like someone had pulled off the blankets. The kitchen sink held 1 dirty cup. On the counter was a stack of mail held down by a soup can, but it looked disturbed, like someone had been digging through it. Then she saw the hardware on the spare room door. New wood, fresh screws, a padlock that didn't belong in her father's house. Hannah's chest tightened. She tried to convince herself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Frank was fixing something. Maybe he'd locked it because he was storing tools. Maybe. Then she heard the scraping. And everything reasonable died. Some mornings after she'd stumble home from a shift, Frank would be waiting in his recliner with the local news on mute, pretending he just happened to be awake. He'd hand her a plate with toast and peanut butter the way he used to when she was a kid, and he'd say, "Eat. You can't save the world on an empty tank." Hannah would roll her eyes and smile, but inside she'd feel that sharp little ache, because she knew she had almost lost the chance to sit in a kitchen with him at all. Vermilion wasn't a place where people disappeared easily. It was a lake town with old houses and tight sidewalks, where you waved at the same faces every week at the grocery store and the post office. People noticed if your porch light stayed off. People noticed if you stopped showing up at church fish fries. People noticed if you stopped being yourself. So when Frank started changing, Hannah told herself it was just age, or winter blues, or the aches in his hands that got worse when the wind came off Lake Erie. But she also noticed little things that didn't fit. Frank would flinch when the phone rang. He'd tuck mail into his coat pocket instead of leaving it on the counter. Once, Hannah found him standing at the back window, looking at the alley like he was waiting for someone to step out of the dark. "What are you doing, Dad?" she'd asked, trying to laugh. "Nothing," he'd said too fast. "Just listening." And sometimes, late at night when Hannah came home, she'd see a thin strip of light under the spare room door. She'd think Frank was tinkering with tools or sorting boxes. When she asked, he'd say, "Just organizing, kid. Don't worry about it." Hannah hated how often that phrase showed up in her life. Don't worry about it. It was the same thing her mother used to say when she was sick and trying to act brave. It was what Hannah said to herself when she ignored Frank's missed calls and went back to work because the unit needed her. Now, standing in that hallway with a padlock in her hands, Hannah understood what that phrase really meant. It meant, "Please don't look too close, because if you do, you'll see I'm scared." After the police took her statement and the paramedics started working on Frank, Hannah stood in the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the broken door and the splintered wood, feeling like her whole life had tilted. An officer asked her, "Do you know anyone who would do this to him?" Hannah opened her mouth and realized she didn't even know who had been in her father's life lately, because Frank had been hiding something bigger than a missed call, and whatever it was, it had just followed Hannah home. Frank was taken to Firelands Regional Medical Center in Sandusky, lights flashing through the winter morning as the ambulance cut along Route 6. Hannah rode in the front seat, hands clenched, trying not to cry in front of strangers. At the hospital, the doctor called it dehydration, malnutrition, and signs of blunt force trauma. They asked Frank questions in a gentle voice like they were afraid he might shatter. Frank answered with tight lips and stubborn eyes. He refused to say who locked him up. He refused to say why. He only kept asking for his coat pocket. "My letter," he kept whispering. Did she get it? Hannah held the envelope in her purse like it was fragile glass. She hadn't opened it. It felt wrong, like reading it would be stealing a part of him, but she could feel the weight of it all the same. Outside Frank's room, a social worker talked to Hannah about adult protective services and safe discharge plans. A detective from the Vermilion Police Department came in and asked for a timeline. Hannah answered everything she could, but her answers felt thin. In Frank's room, Hannah watched the nurse chart bruises on a body that had once carried steel beams like they were nothing. The nurse kept her voice neutral, but her eyes held that look Hannah recognized from work, the look that said, "We've seen this before, and it never ends the way it should." Frank tried to wave it off. "I fell," he muttered. Hannah couldn't take it. "He didn't fall," she said, and the words tasted like metal. "Someone did this." The doctor ordered blood work and an X-ray. Frank hated the attention, hated the questions, hated feeling weak. When the nurse asked if he felt safe at home, Frank looked at the wall and didn't answer. Hannah answered for him. "No," she said. "He's not safe." In the hallway, Hannah called her charge nurse to explain she'd need time off. Her supervisor didn't argue. "Go," she said simply. "Family first." Those words should have comforted Hannah. Instead, they punched her with guilt, because family first was what she should have lived by years ago. When Hannah went back to Vermilion that afternoon, she stopped at the little post office first, just to see if there were packages Frank had been too proud to ask her to pick up. The clerk gave Hannah a look, half pity, half warning, and slid the mail across the counter without a word. Outside, the wind cut through Hannah's coat. She watched a pickup roll past slowly, the driver's head turning as if taking inventory of her. It was a small-town thing. people watching. But this felt different, like they were watching because they knew something she didn't. On her way to the hospital cafeteria, Hannah checked her messages. There was a voicemail from an unknown number. She listened. A man's voice, smooth and calm like a customer service rep. "Ms. Price, this is Grant Holloway returning your father's call. He left several messages for me last night. It's important we speak. Please call me back when you get a chance." Hannah replayed it twice. Her skin crawled at how normal the voice sounded. Grant Holloway. She'd never heard the name. But Frank had, and Frank had called him 3 times, right before he ended up locked in a room without food. When Hannah returned to Vermilion that afternoon to grab clothes and Frank's wallet, the town felt off. The lake was a sheet of gray under a low sky. Snow drifted in slow spirals across the streets. The Christmas lights on the lamp posts looked tired. Even the little coffee shop on Liberty Avenue seemed quieter than usual. People watched Hannah's car as she drove by. At the stoplight, a woman she recognized from high school, now working at the pharmacy, stared at her and then quickly looked away. Hannah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She stopped at the corner diner, Rosie's place, because she needed a hot cup of coffee and because she needed information, and small towns always talked in diners. The bell over the door jingled. Warm air and the smell of bacon wrapped around her. A few regulars looked up, then looked down. Rosie herself, an older woman with tired eyes, poured Hannah coffee without asking. "Honey," Rosie said softly, "how's your daddy?" Hannah's throat tightened. "He's in the hospital." Rosie's mouth pressed into a line. She wiped a clean spot on the counter that didn't need wiping. "I'm sorry." Hannah leaned in. "Rosie, what do you know? People are acting weird." Rosie glanced toward the booths like she was checking who might be listening. "I don't know much," she said, voice lowered. "Just, folks have been worried. Your dad's been different, and there's been a man coming around." "What man?" Rosie hesitated. "Suit, nice coat, like he belongs in an office, not here. He came in once, asked questions about Frank, paid cash, smiled the whole time like it was all polite." Hannah felt cold spread under her skin. "Do you know his name?" Rosie shook her head. "But I know someone who might. Earl Jensen. He lives 2 streets over from your dad. He's been here every morning at 6 for 20 years. If anyone saw something, he did." Hannah found Earl in the corner booth, hunched over his eggs. He used to wave at Frank from his porch. Now, when Hannah walked up, his shoulders stiffened. "Hannah," he said without looking up. "Earl, please," she said. "My dad was locked in a room. Someone did this. You live close. You had to have seen something." Earl's fork paused in midair. He swallowed hard. "I ain't getting involved." Hannah's pulse thudded in her ears. "Why not?" Earl finally looked at her. His eyes were wet, and there was fear there. Real fear. "Because that man," he whispered, "he ain't just some suit. He's got papers. He's got people. And he's got a way of making things look legal." Hannah leaned closer. "Who is he?" Earl's hand shook as he set down his fork. "You need to see with your own eyes," he said. "Go to the house, look in the mailbox, look at the door, then tell me you still think this is just bad luck." Hannah stood up, coffee untouched, her stomach turning. Because if there were papers, if there was something legal, then it meant someone had been circling Frank for a while. And now that Hannah was back in town, she had a terrible feeling the circle was tightening around her too. The house looked the same from the street. The same peeling paint, the same wind chime hanging from the porch beam, the same little plastic Santa that Frank refused to throw away, because it still works. But up close, Hannah saw what Earl meant. There was a notice taped to the front door under a strip of clear plastic, like it was meant to survive the weather. Official looking, black letters, a seal. The words "Notice of Default" jumped off the page. Hannah's hands went numb. She ripped the plastic and paper off the door and read, her breath coming in sharp bursts. It was about property taxes, about liens, about a payment plan agreement that had been broken. The signature at the bottom was Frank Price's name, but the handwriting looked wrong. Too clean, too smooth. She went to the mailbox. It was stuffed with envelopes stamped final, past due, urgent. One envelope was from a company called Lakefront Asset Solutions. Another was from a law office in Sandusky. And then, tucked between them like someone had placed it there on purpose, was a plain business card. Grant Holloway, it read. Senior Client Advisor, Lakefront Asset Solutions. A phone number. An office address in downtown Sandusky. Hannah's mouth went dry. She stepped inside the house, boots leaving wet marks on the worn carpet. The living room felt stripped. Frank's framed photos were gone from the mantel. The old clock he kept wound was missing. Even the glass dish that held his spare change was empty. Someone had been here. In Frank's bedroom, she opened the dresser drawer where he kept paperwork. It was almost empty, like someone had scooped out the important parts and left the junk. She found only an old Union booklet and a faded photo of Frank holding Hannah as a toddler. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her eyes. She thought about Frank's pride, his quieting down, the curtains closed, the missed calls. He hadn't been pulling away from her. He'd been drowning, and he didn't want her to see. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered because her nerves were stretched raw. Hello? Ms. Price, the smooth voice said. This is Grant Holloway. I'm sorry about your father. I heard there was an incident. Hannah's grip tightened on the phone. Who are you? I work with seniors in the county, he said calmly. Your father came to us for help. He was behind on taxes. He was scared. I offered solutions. You offered a padlock? Hannah snapped. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle, like she'd said something naive. I don't know what you mean. My father was locked in a room. He was hurt. He was starving, and your name is on his door. Grant's voice stayed even. People do things when they're upset. Frank is complicated. He agreed to certain terms. He signed paperwork. If he violated those terms, consequences follow. Hannah felt heat flood her face. What terms? What paperwork? You're welcome to come to my office, Grant said. We can discuss it like adults. But I suggest you don't accuse me of crimes without understanding the situation. Crimes? Hannah repeated. My father almost died. Grant sighed like he was dealing with a difficult customer. Miss Price, I'm trying to prevent bigger problems. Your father has debts. Liens. If you stir up trouble, you could make things worse for him. For you. The last two words landed heavy. Hannah swallowed. Where is the missing paperwork? His photos? His things? Another pause. We secured certain items for safekeeping, Grant said. Important documents. Personal effects. Again. Standard procedure. Give them back. I can't release anything without authorization, Grant replied. And your father is not in a state to make good decisions. Hannah's stomach turned. You're saying my father can't decide. So who can? You, Grant said smoothly. If you become his legal representative, power of attorney, we can protect him. Together. Hannah's eyes narrowed. It sounded like help, but it tasted like a trap. She hung up without answering. In the quiet house, the wind rattled the windows. Hannah looked at the empty mantel, the missing clock, the stripped drawers. Then she remembered something Frank had said in the locked room. Don't let him take it. The letter. Whatever was in that envelope, Grant Holloway wanted it, or wanted it gone. Hannah needed someone who knew how these things worked, someone who wouldn't flinch at papers and legal terms. She drove to the Erie County Services building, the one she'd passed 100 times without thinking, and she asked for adult protective services. The receptionist gave her a look that said she'd heard stories like this before. A caseworker named Marisol Vega met Hannah in a small office that smelled like old carpet and hand sanitizer. Marisol listened, eyes sharp, taking notes. When Hannah finished, Marisol leaned back and exhaled. I've heard the name Grant Holloway, she said quietly. Hannah's heart pounded. From where? Marisol's gaze held hers. From other seniors who were too scared to file reports, she said. And from one shelter worker who told me, that man makes people disappear from their own lives. Hannah's skin prickled. Marisol slid a card across the desk. If your father was locked up, he didn't lock himself up. And if Holloway is involved, we need evidence, she said. Start with where your father was found. Who saw him? Who fed him? Who heard him? There's always a witness. Hannah stared at the card, because she suddenly understood something that made her stomach sink even deeper. Frank hadn't been locked up for one day. The room smelled like he'd been there longer. And if he'd been there longer, then someone else had known. Someone had heard his coughing through the walls. Someone had walked past that door and pretended not to notice. Hannah left the building with her chest tight and her mind racing, and she drove toward the only place she could think of where people who disappear end up. The shelter in Sandusky, under the highway overpass, and she prayed she wouldn't find her father's name on a list of the forgotten. The drive to Sandusky felt longer than it should have, even though it was less than 20 miles. Snow blew across the road in thin sheets. The lake to the north was invisible behind gray clouds, but Hannah could feel it, cold, endless, watching. She passed the Walmart on Milan Road where Frank used to buy cheap gloves every winter. She passed a laundromat with foggy windows and a flickering open sign. She passed the bus station where she'd once watched her mother leave for Cleveland for chemo, waving like she didn't want anyone to see her fear. Everything in this part of Ohio carried memory if you let it. Hannah pulled into the parking lot of Harbor Hope Shelter, a low brick building tucked beside an overpass, with a line of people bundled in coats even at noon. Exhaust from traffic rumbled overhead like distant thunder. The air smelled like wet wool and cigarettes. Inside it was warm and crowded. A volunteer handed out soup in paper bowls. Someone was arguing quietly near the front desk. A little TV played news with the volume low. Hannah approached a woman wearing a lanyard and a faded sweater. The woman's name tag read, Tara. I'm looking for someone, Hannah said, trying to keep her voice steady. My father, Frank Price. Tara's eyes flicked over Hannah's hospital badge, her tired face, the way she held herself like she was bracing for impact. Tara's expression softened a little. We don't give out personal information, she said. I understand, Hannah replied quickly. But he was hurt. He was locked up. I need to know if he came through here. If someone saw him. Tara hesitated, then nodded toward a back hallway. Talk to Deshawn, she said. He's been here the longest. He's got a memory like a file cabinet. Deshawn was a tall man with a knit cap pulled low and a calm, steady presence. He listened while Hannah explained, and when she said Grant Holloway's name, his jaw tightened. That guy, Deshawn said softly. Yeah, I know that guy. Hannah's pulse jumped. You've seen him here? Not inside, Deshawn said. He don't come into places like this. He sends people, folks in work boots, folks in hoodies. They come and check on people like they own 'em. Hannah's hands clenched. Have you seen my dad? Deshawn looked at her for a long beat. Then he nodded once. I seen an older white man with a busted cheek, real proud even when he was hurting, he said. He came by the back steps one night, wouldn't come in, said he wasn't homeless, said he was just waiting. Waiting for what? Hannah's voice broke. When was this? Couple weeks ago, Deshawn said. It was cold like this. He asked me for water. I gave him a bottle and a granola bar. He didn't eat in front of me. He tucked it in his coat like he was saving it. Hannah's eyes stung. Did he say anything? Where he was staying? Deshawn's gaze turned hard. He said, If my daughter calls, tell her I'm sorry. He paused. Then he said, Tell her not to trust the man in the suit. Hannah swallowed a sob. Did he tell you the man's name? He didn't have to, Deshawn replied. That suit comes around the same time as the threats, the same time as the papers. He's been picking people clean. Hannah leaned closer. Deshawn, I need something I can use. Evidence. A name. A date. Deshawn nodded slowly. There's a lady, he said. Ms. Carroll. She sleeps in the women's dorm. She don't talk much, but she sees everything. She told me she saw the suit in a parking lot one night, talking to your dad. She might talk to you. Tara escorted Hannah to a small meeting room. Ms. Carroll sat in a folding chair with her hands wrapped around a paper cup. She was older than Hannah, maybe late 50s, with hair that had gone gray too early. Her eyes were sharp, cautious. Hannah introduced herself. "My dad," she said, voice trembling. "He's the kindest person I know. Somebody did something to him. I need to stop it." Carol watched Hannah for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly. "I saw him," she said. "Your dad. He was outside the Walmart parking lot near the cart return, late, maybe midnight. He looked like he didn't know where to go." Hannah's breath caught. "And the man?" Carol nodded. "A man in a nice coat, clean shoes. He didn't belong there," she said. "He kept smiling while he talked, like he was being friendly. But your dad was shaking. I could see it from across the lot." "What did they do?" Hannah asked. Carol swallowed. "The man handed your dad some papers. Your dad tried to give them back. Then the man leaned in close and said something. Your dad's face just fell, like he'd been punched from the inside." Hannah's nails dug into her palm. "Can you tell the police this?" Carol's eyes flicked toward the door. "If I do, that man's people will find me," she whispered. Hannah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "My dad was locked in a room. He could have died. If you help me, I can help protect you. I can connect you with services. I can get you into a safer place." Carol stared at Hannah, searching her face for a lie. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll tell a detective," she said, "but only if you're there." Hannah exhaled shakily. "Thank you." As Hannah stood to leave, Deshawn stopped her near the front desk. "One more thing," he said. "What?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. "Your dad dropped this," he said. "I kept it 'cause it had a name on it. Thought it might matter." Hannah unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was from a storage unit place. Sandusky, Secure Storage, Unit 214. Paid in cash. Name on the account, Lakefront Asset Solutions. Hannah's mouth went dry. Because if Grant Holloway had a storage unit and Frank's photos and paperwork were missing, then everything Grant said about safekeeping was true in one sense. He had taken her father's life and put it in a box. And now Hannah knew exactly where to go next. 2 days later, Frank was still in the hospital, a thin blanket pulled up to his chest, his skin pale against the white sheets. He tried to joke with the nurse who checked his IV, but his voice was weaker than Hannah had ever heard. Hannah sat beside him with the envelope in her lap. Hannah adjusted Frank's blanket and noticed how his hands kept searching the air, like they were reaching for a tool that wasn't there. Even resting, he couldn't stop being a worker. He couldn't stop trying to fix. A nurse came in to check his vitals. Frank tried to sit up straighter again. "I'm fine," he insisted. The nurse gave Hannah a careful look and said, "Mr. Price, it's okay to let your daughter help." Frank's shoulders sagged after she left. He stared at his hands like he was ashamed of them. "Hannah," he whispered, "I didn't want you to see me like that." "Like what?" Hannah asked, throat tight. "Small," he said, and the word broke something in her. "He made me feel small." Hannah shook her head fiercely. "You are not small," she said. "You survived things I can't even imagine. You raised me. You stayed when Mom got sick. You carried us." Frank's eyes filled. "I couldn't carry this," he whispered. "You don't have to carry it alone," Hannah said. "Not anymore." "Dad," she said softly, "I talked to Adult Protective Services, and I went to Harbor Hope." Frank's eyes closed. His jaw tightened. "I met people who saw you," Hannah continued. "People who gave you water, who heard you apologize for something you don't need to apologize for." Frank's throat worked. He didn't speak. Hannah leaned forward. "Tell me what happened," she whispered. "Who did this?" Frank's eyes opened, wet and stubborn. "I didn't want you dragged into it," he rasped. "I'm already in it," Hannah said. "Look at you." Frank's gaze drifted to the window where snow fell in slow motion. "He came like help," he said quietly. "That's how they get you. Like help." Hannah held Frank's hand, feeling the rough calluses that had come from decades of hard work. "Who is he?" she asked. Frank swallowed. "Grant Holloway," he said, like the name tasted bitter. "He said he could fix my taxes, said he worked with seniors, said he cared." Hannah's stomach twisted. "And you believed him?" Frank's eyes flashed. "I believed I didn't have a choice," he said. "I missed one payment. One. Then the letters came. Then the calls. Then the threats wrapped up in polite words." Hannah opened her mouth, but Frank squeezed her hand weakly. "Hannah," he said, "you got your own life, your job. I didn't want you carrying my mess." "It's not your mess," Hannah said sharply, then softened when she saw him flinch. "Or if it is, it's our mess. I live here. I'm your daughter." Frank's eyes filled. He looked away quickly, ashamed of tears. "They made me sign things," he whispered. "Paper after paper. They said it was normal. They said it was to protect me. They said if I didn't sign, I'd lose the house anyway." "And you signed," Hannah said, her voice shaking. Frank nodded once. "Then they started taking," he said, "my bank card, my checks. They said they were managing it. Then they took my pictures, said it was inventory, like I was dead already." Hannah felt rage rise, hot and sharp. "And the padlock?" she asked. Frank's face went gray. His fingers trembled. "I tried to stop it," he whispered. "I tried to call you. I tried to call the police. But every time I lifted the phone, I heard his voice in my head saying, 'We can make this easy, or we can make this ugly.'" Hannah's throat tightened. "What did he mean by ugly?" Frank's eyes flicked to the envelope. "He meant that," Frank said softly. "He meant the letter." Hannah's heart pounded. "Why? What's in it?" Frank shook his head. "Not here," he whispered, fear sliding into his voice. "Walls got ears." Hannah glanced toward the hospital door. The idea felt ridiculous, but then she remembered the padlock, the bruises, the way Grant's voice had been so calm. "Dad," she said gently, "I can keep you safe, but you have to trust me." Frank's eyes squeezed shut, and when he opened them again, something in him had shifted, like a man stepping out of denial into the cold truth. "I can't go back," he whispered. "You don't have to," Hannah promised. "Not ever." Frank shook his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Not just the house," he said. "I can't go back to what he made me do." Hannah's stomach turned. "What did he make you do?" Frank's voice dropped. "He made me lock myself in," he whispered. "He said it was for my own protection. Said someone might come take things. Said I needed to stay quiet until papers cleared. He brought food sometimes." Then he stopped. "He said if I wanted to eat, I needed to sign more." Hannah felt sick. "You were trapped," she whispered. Frank nodded, shame burning in his eyes. "I kept thinking, just one more signature and it'll be over." He swallowed. "Then I heard you pull in that morning and I thought I was dreaming." Hannah leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "I'm here," she said. "I'm not leaving." Frank's fingers tightened around hers. "He'll come," he whispered. "He'll come for the letter. He'll come for you to sign." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Let him try," she said, even though fear curled in her gut. That night, after Frank fell asleep, Hannah drove back to Sandusky Secure Storage. The place was lit by harsh floodlights. Rows of metal doors stared back like blank eyes. The air smelled like exhaust and cold steel. Hannah parked and walked to the office window. Closed. A sign on the door said, "Access hours end 9 p.m. She checked her watch. 9:12. She exhaled, frustration rising. Then she noticed a shadow moving between the rows. Someone walking with purpose, like they had a code and no fear of being seen. Hannah's pulse jumped, because she wasn't alone in that storage yard, and whoever was there knew exactly which unit held her father's life. Hannah ducked behind a row of storage doors, her breath fogging in front of her. She pulled her phone from her pocket, finger hovering over the screen. "Call the police," her brain shouted. But another part of her, the part that had watched patients get ignored until there was proof, knew she needed to see what was happening. The shadow stopped at Unit 214. A man punched in a code at the gate keypad. He moved like he belonged there. Not Grant Holloway. This man was younger, broader, wearing a hoodie under a work jacket. He rolled up the metal door with a loud rattle. Hannah held her breath. Inside the unit were stacks of boxes, plastic bins, and a metal filing cabinet. The man grabbed a bin labeled with black marker, "Price, Frank." Hannah's stomach clenched so hard she thought she might throw up. He slid the bin toward the front, lifted the lid, and began rifling through papers like he was shopping. Hannah quietly hit record on her phone, angling it around the edge of the storage door so it would capture the man's face and the label. The man pulled out a framed photo. Frank and Hannah at the lake, smiling. He stared at it for a second with a blank expression, then tossed it back into the bin like it meant nothing. Then he pulled out something that made Hannah's heart slam. An envelope. Not the one in her purse. Another envelope. Older. Sealed with tape. The paper worn. He held it up like it was the prize. He leaned closer to the light and checked the name on it. Hannah couldn't hear the name, but she saw the man's shoulders tense, like he'd found what he came for. He stuffed the envelope into his jacket pocket. Hannah's hand shook. She had enough now. A face, a theft, a link. She stepped back, finger hovering over 911, and her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. You shouldn't be there. Hannah's blood turned to ice. The man at the unit froze, head snapping up, eyes scanning the row. Hannah didn't think. She ran. Her boots slipped on the icy pavement as she sprinted toward her car, the floodlights casting harsh shadows. The man shouted something behind her and started running too. Hannah fumbled her keys, got the door open, and slid inside. She jammed the key into the ignition, hands shaking so badly she missed the slot once. The engine coughed, then started. She slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning on the ice. The man reached the back of her car just as she pulled away. His hand slapped the trunk. Hannah didn't stop. She drove out of the lot and onto the main road, heart pounding, the dark fields on either side making her feel like she was flying through a tunnel. She didn't breathe until she hit a traffic light and realized her hands were locked on the steering wheel. At home, she double-locked the doors and sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, shaking. Then she watched the video. The man's face was clear enough, and the label on the bin was undeniable. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't complicated. It was theft. It was control. It was a man with clean shoes using dirty tactics. Hannah called Detective Ryan Caldwell at the Vermilion Police Department, the one who'd taken the report. Caldwell sounded tired, but when Hannah described the storage unit and the video, his tone sharpened. "Do not go back there," he said. "Send me the video. Tonight." Hannah emailed it immediately. Then she sat in Frank's hospital room the next morning, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of sleep, and she told him what she'd found. Frank's eyes opened, fear flooding them. "They're taking the letters," he whispered. "How many are there?" Hannah asked. Frank swallowed, voice shaky. "Just one mattered," he said. "The one your mother wrote. The one I couldn't destroy." Hannah stared at him. "Mom wrote it?" Frank nodded, eyes wet. "Before she died," he whispered. "She said if anything ever happened, you needed to know." Hannah's mouth went dry. She'd lost her mother to cancer when she was 19. There were pieces of that year she still couldn't touch without breaking. "What do I need to know?" Hannah asked softly. Frank squeezed his eyes shut. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not until you're safe." Hannah's chest tightened. "Dad, this is why they're hurting you," she said. "This is why Grant Holloway is circling us. Whatever is in that letter, he thinks it can destroy him." Frank's breathing grew shallow. He looked terrified, like a man remembering something he'd buried. Hannah leaned closer. "Listen to me," she said, voice firm. "We're going to do this the right way. Police, evidence, witnesses, no shortcuts. But I need you with me." Frank opened his eyes and nodded once, slow and heavy. Before Hannah left the hospital that day, she met Caldwell near the nurses' station. He didn't look like a TV detective. He looked like a man who'd seen too many families fall apart in quiet ways. Tired eyes, scuffed boots, a coffee stain on his sleeve. "You did the right thing recording," he told her. But Holloway will say you're harassing his business. He'll try to flip the story. So we stay calm, we stay clean. We build a case he can't talk his way out of." Hannah nodded, swallowing fear. "What if he comes back?" she asked. Caldwell glanced toward Frank's door. "Then we document it," he said. "Every call, every visit, every message. Predators hate light." As Hannah walked back into Frank's room, she noticed a new sign taped to the wall. "Visitors must check in." It should have made her feel safer. Instead, it reminded her that danger could wear a nice coat and walk right through a hospital door. Hannah squeezed his hand. "If you want justice for what he did to you," she whispered, "you have to let me fight. And if you're still watching, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because stories like this happen in quiet towns everywhere, and the more we talk about them, the harder it is for people like Grant Holloway to hide." Frank's voice was barely a breath. "He'll come to the hospital," he whispered. Hannah's spine chilled. "Why would he?" she asked. Frank stared at her, eyes wide. "Because," he whispered, "he thinks you're going to sign." And right then, down the hallway, Hannah saw a man in a nice coat walking toward Frank's room, smiling like he owned the place. Hannah stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Her heart hammered as she stepped into the doorway and blocked it with her body. The man in the coat slowed, smile still in place. He was handsome in a polished way, dark hair neatly cut, clean-shaven, a leather briefcase in his hand. The kind of man you'd trust with your retirement account because he looked like he belonged on a billboard. "Grant Holloway." "Ms. Price," he said, voice warm. "I'm glad to see your father is receiving care." Hannah's hands clenched at her sides. "You need to leave," she said. Grant's smile didn't change. "I'm here to check on my client," he replied. "Frank asked me for help." Frank's eyes opened on the bed, and the fear that crossed his face made Hannah's stomach twist. Detective Caldwell had told Hannah Grant could show up. "They do," Caldwell had said. "They come in polite and try to lock things down before anyone understands what's happening." Hannah had hoped Frank would be spared that. Grant took a small step forward. Hannah didn't move. "I have paperwork," Grant said, tapping his briefcase. "Simple. Protective. It ensures Mr. Price's bills are paid while he recovers. It would be irresponsible to delay." "It would be criminal," Hannah snapped, "for you to come into a hospital and pressure an elderly man." Grant's eyes flicked over her, calm and assessing. "You're emotional," he said gently. "Understandable, but emotion doesn't change legal facts." Hannah pulled out her phone and held it up. "I have video of your worker stealing my father's property from a storage unit," she said. "Unit 214. The bin labeled with my father's name. You want to talk legal facts? Let's talk about that." For the first time, Grant's smile wavered. Just a fraction. But Hannah saw it. Grant recovered quickly. "I'm not sure what you think you saw," he said, "but you should be careful making accusations." Hannah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You locked my father in a room," she whispered. "You starved him. You hurt him. And you're done." Grant's expression cooled. The warmth drained. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Your father is in debt. People get hurt when debts go unpaid. I've been trying to keep him afloat." Frank made a small sound from the bed. "Liar," he rasped. Grant turned his head toward Frank, smile returning as if he was comforting a child. "Frank," he said softly, "let's not do this here." Hannah's body tensed. She could feel her pulse in her neck. A nurse passed in the hall and glanced in. Hannah forced her face into something calm. She wouldn't give Grant the satisfaction of making her look unstable. Detective Caldwell arrived 10 minutes later with a uniformed officer. Grant stood in the corner, hands folded, looking offended rather than afraid. Caldwell's eyes met Hannah's. "Mr. Holloway," he said, voice flat, "we need to ask you some questions." Grant lifted his eyebrows. "Of course," he said. "I'm happy to cooperate." Caldwell glanced at Frank. "Mr. Price, are you aware of any agreement that gives Mr. Holloway control over your finances or your property?" Frank's throat worked. He looked at Hannah, then at Caldwell. His eyes filled with shame. He made me sign," Frank whispered. Grant sighed dramatically. Detective, you see what I'm dealing with? He said. Confusion. Trauma. It's sad. Caldwell didn't bite. We'll verify signatures, he said. We'll verify documents. And we'll be visiting your office. Grant's smile returned, but it looked tighter now. You're welcome any time, he said. After they left, Caldwell pulled Hannah aside in the hallway. We need more than your video, he said quietly. It's good. It's a start. But Holloway will claim he had authorization. We need witnesses. We need a pattern. Hannah nodded, jaw clenched. Harbor Hope has people who saw him, she said. A woman named Carol. A man named Deshawn. Caldwell's eyes sharpened. Good, he said. We'll take statements. Hannah swallowed. And the letter, she whispered. He's after a letter. Caldwell frowned. Keep it safe, he said. Don't open it if it compromises you, but if it contains evidence, we may need it. Hannah went back into Frank's room and found him staring at the ceiling, breathing shallow. He came, Frank whispered, voice trembling. Like I said, he's not taking anything else from you, Hannah said, forcing steadiness into her voice. Frank turned his head toward her. He already took something, he whispered. Hannah's stomach dropped. What? She asked. Frank's eyes filled. Your mother's ring, he whispered. The one I kept in the sock drawer. He took it. Hannah's vision blurred with rage. Because it wasn't just money. It wasn't just the house. Grant Holloway was stealing Frank's memories, one piece at a time, like erasing him. And the more Hannah dug, the more she realized her father wasn't the only one. That afternoon, Detective Caldwell arranged a meeting at the precinct with other seniors who had quietly complained about Lakefront Asset Solutions. Hannah sat in a plain room with a cheap coffee pot and watched people walk in one by one, men and women with stooped shoulders, tired eyes, hands that shook. One woman wore a winter coat with the zipper broken. A man clutched a folder of paperwork like it was his only shield. They told stories that sounded like echoes. A helpful advisor, paperwork, payment plans, threats wrapped in smiles. One man said, he told me I'd lose my house if I didn't sign. Then he charged me fees until I couldn't breathe. A woman whispered, he said he'd call my son's job and tell them I was crazy. Hannah's stomach turned with every word. Caldwell took notes, eyes hardening. Then Ms. Carroll from the shelter came in, escorted by Marisol, the caseworker. Carol looked terrified, but she sat down and told her Walmart parking lot story in a shaking voice. When she finished, Caldwell nodded. Thank you, he said. That matters. So Hannah walked out of the precinct into the cold evening air, feeling both heavier and clearer. They had a pattern. They had witnesses. Now all they needed was the piece that would crack the whole thing open. And she knew exactly where it was. Grant Holloway's respectable office downtown. Hannah looked at Frank's envelope in her purse and felt it like a heartbeat. Then her phone buzzed with a text. From an unknown number. Bring the letter tomorrow, or he won't leave the hospital alive. Hannah's breath caught. Because the fight had just turned into a clock, Hannah didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the lights off, watching the snow fall past the window, her phone in her hand. The text message burned into her mind. Bring the letter tomorrow, or he won't leave the hospital alive. She called Detective Caldwell. He answered on the second ring, voice low. Hannah read the message aloud. There was a pause on the line. Then Caldwell said, Do not engage directly. We'll handle it. Hannah swallowed. He's threatening my dad. We'll increase security at the hospital, Caldwell said. And we're going to pay a visit to Holloway in the morning. You can come. But you do exactly what I say. Hannah's jaw clenched. I'm coming, she said. At 9 a.m., Hannah met Caldwell and Marisol Vega outside Lakefront Asset Solutions, a clean glass front office on a street lined with law firms and accounting services. A small plaque by the door looked official. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive coffee. The receptionist at the front desk had perfect nails and a practiced smile. She offered Hannah bottled water as if they were there to discuss a mortgage, not an elderly man's bruises. While Caldwell showed his badge, Hannah noticed a small bowl of mints on the counter and a framed certificate about senior advocacy. The whole place was designed to look safe. That was the trick. Make the cage look like a clinic. Grant Holloway greeted them like they were guests at a charity event. "Detective," he said warmly. "Ms. Vega, Ms. Price. I was just about to call you." Caldwell held up a warrant. "We're here to review records related to Frank Price and several other clients," he said. Grant's smile stayed in place, but his eyes hardened. "Of course," he said. "We have nothing to hide." He led them down a hallway into a conference room with framed photos of smiling seniors shaking hands with staff. The pictures made Hannah feel sick. Grant sat across from them, fingers steepled. "Frank is a complicated case," he said. "He's had cognitive decline. He's prone to paranoia. I've tried to keep him safe." Marisol's voice was sharp. "By locking him in a room?" she asked. Grant's gaze slid to her. "Allegations," he said. Caldwell opened a folder. "We have witness statements," he said. "And we have video evidence from a storage unit paid for by your company." Grant's nostrils flared slightly. "I'd like to see that video," he said. Caldwell didn't hand it over. "You'll see it in court," he replied. For a second the room went quiet except for the faint hum of the building's heating system. Then Grant leaned back and sighed like a man disappointed in humanity. "You're making a big mistake," he said softly, looking at Hannah. "This is emotional for you. I get it, but you don't know your father the way you think you do." Hannah felt her blood heat. "I know he didn't lock himself up," she said. Grant smiled sadly. "Frank has secrets," he said. "And secrets make people do strange things." Hannah's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. She could feel the envelope inside. Grant's eyes flicked to the purse. He saw it, his gaze locked on it with hunger he tried to hide. Caldwell noticed. His posture shifted, alert. Grant cleared his throat. "Since we're being honest," he said, "I should mention something. Your father signed a document granting me temporary authority to secure certain personal items. For his protection." Marisol's eyes narrowed. "That document will be examined," she said. Grant nodded. "Of course," he replied. "But in the meantime, I do have something that belongs to him." Hannah's stomach tightened. "What?" she asked. Grant opened his briefcase slowly, like he was performing a magic trick. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and set it on the table. Hannah's breath caught. Frank's wedding ring, worn gold, scratched from work, spilled out into Grant's palm. Beside it was a simple silver band with a tiny chip in the stone. Her mother's ring. Hannah's vision blurred with rage. "You stole that," she whispered. Grant's smile was almost gentle. "I safeguarded it," he corrected. "Because Frank wasn't making sound decisions." Caldwell's voice was flat. "Where did you get those rings, Mr. Holloway?" Grant met his gaze evenly. "From Frank," he lied. Hannah leaned forward, voice shaking. "Give it back," she said. Grant tilted his head. "I will," he said. "When the correct paperwork is signed." Marisol's face went cold. "Extortion," she said. Grant shrugged slightly. "Structure," he replied. "Order." Caldwell placed his hand on the table. "We're done," he said. "Hand over all client files related to these cases." Grant's eyes stayed on Hannah. "Not until we handle the letter," he said softly. Hannah's heart slammed. "What letter?" she asked, forcing innocence into her tone. Grant smiled. "Don't insult me," he said. "Your father called me last night begging. He said you had it. He said it could ruin everything." Hannah held his gaze, fighting to keep her face steady. "You've already ruined everything," she said. Grant's smile thinned. "I can ruin more," he whispered. Caldwell stood. "We're leaving," he said. "You'll be hearing from the prosecutor." Grant rose too, still calm. "Before you go," he said, voice quiet, "there's something you still don't know." Hannah's skin prickled. "What?" she asked. Grant's eyes softened in a way that looked almost real. "Your father didn't just lose money," he said. "He lost someone, a long time ago. Someone he never told you about." Hannah's breath caught. Grant leaned in slightly, just enough for Hannah to hear him over the hum of the heat. "That letter?" he whispered. is about me? In the elevator down, Hannah's knees felt unsteady. Caldwell kept one hand near her elbow, steadying her without making it obvious. Through the glass doors the street looked normal. Cars passing, people carrying coffee. Like evil didn't belong here. Hannah's world tilted, because the way he said it wasn't like a threat. It was like a confession. And she didn't know yet if that made him more dangerous or more human. They left the office with Caldwell's warrant copy and the cold feeling that Grant Holloway was still smiling behind them. Back in the car, Hannah's hand shook on her lap. "He said the letter was about him," she whispered. Marisol glanced at her. "Predators use whatever story fits," she said. "Don't let him twist you." But Hannah couldn't shake the way Grant had looked at her when he said it, like he recognized her, like he'd been waiting. At the hospital, Frank was awake, sipping water slowly, his hand still trembling. Hannah took his hand and sat close, lowering her voice. "Dad," she said, "Grant came to his office. He has Mom's ring. He said the letter is about him." Frank's face went pale. His eyes filled with fear and something else. Grief. "Hannah," Frank whispered, voice raw. "I tried to bury that." Hannah's chest tightened. "What is it?" she asked. "Tell me." Frank's throat worked. He looked toward the door, as if expecting Grant to walk in at any second. "When your mom was sick," he began, "there were bills. More bills than I could pay. I was working extra shifts at the plant. I was driving side jobs. I was doing everything, and it still wasn't enough." Hannah's eyes stung. She remembered her mother's thin hands, the chemo smell, the way Frank had tried to smile through it. Frank swallowed. "A woman from the church told me about a program," he said. "Said there were people who could help families in crisis. Low-interest loans. Charity, they called it." Hannah's jaw tightened. It wasn't charity. Frank shook his head slowly. "It was a trap," he whispered. "But I didn't know. I was desperate." He squeezed Hannah's hand. "I met a man," he said, voice breaking. "His name was Howard Holloway." Hannah's stomach twisted. "Grant's father?" Frank nodded, shame in his eyes. "Howard wore a suit and talked about God and responsibility," Frank said. "He said he could help us keep the house while your mom fought. He said it would be temporary." Frank's breath shuddered. Then he started asking for more. Fees, interest, insurance. He made me sign papers I didn't understand, and when I couldn't keep up, he threatened to take everything. Hannah felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Frank's eyes filled. "Because I was supposed to protect you," he said. "Instead, I brought a predator to our door." He wiped at his cheek with a trembling hand. "Howard had a son," Frank continued. "A boy, maybe 8 or 9. Grant." Hannah's breath caught. She pictured Grant now, polished and calm, and tried to imagine him as a child. Frank's voice dropped. "One day Howard came to the house while your mom was asleep," he said. "Grant was with him. The boy was crying. Howard grabbed him so hard it left marks. He was a cruel man." Frank's eyes squeezed shut. "Grant looked at me like he was begging without words," Frank whispered. "And I did something stupid." Hannah leaned in. "What did you do?" Frank's voice cracked. "I gave Howard money I didn't have," he whispered. "I took it out of your mom's emergency fund, the one she'd saved before she got sick. I did it because I couldn't stand seeing that boy hurt." Hannah's throat tightened. "Dad?" Frank swallowed hard. "Howard found out," he said. "He beat Grant in the driveway while I stood there shaking. Then he looked at me and said, 'You'll pay for getting involved.'" Frank's eyes opened, wet and haunted. "A week later," he whispered, "Howard came back alone and said the debt was doubled. And if I ever spoke, he'd make sure you and your mom ended up on the street." Hannah felt her breath leave her body. She had lived through that year thinking the worst thing was cancer. She hadn't known there were other monsters in the shadows. Frank's fingers tightened on hers. "Your mom found out," he said. "Not everything, but she found the paperwork. She knew someone was squeezing us. She wrote that letter to you." Hannah's stomach dropped. "Why didn't she give it to me?" Frank's eyes filled. "Because she didn't want you living with fear," he whispered. She asked me to keep it until you were older, until you could handle it. She made me promise." Hannah's hands trembled. "And Grant?" she whispered. "How does he fit?" Frank's face twisted with pain. "After your mom died, Howard disappeared," he said. "I thought it was over. I thought he'd moved on." Frank's voice hardened, just a little. "But Grant grew up," he whispered, "and he came back with his father's name cleaned up and a company that looks respectable." Hannah stared at Frank, her mind racing. "He's doing this because of his father," she said. Frank nodded slowly. "Part of it," he whispered. "But there's more." Hannah's throat tightened. "What more?" Frank looked at the envelope in Hannah's purse, and his whole body trembled. "Because Grant thinks I owe him," he whispered. "Not money." Hannah's heart pounded. "What does he think you owe him?" Frank swallowed. "The truth," he said, "about who he really is." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Dad," she whispered. "What are you saying?" Frank's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a grief that had sat there for decades. "Grant Holloway," he whispered, "is not just Howard's son." Hannah felt her world tilt again. "Then whose—" Frank's voice was barely a breath. "He's mine," he whispered. "And that letter is proof." Hannah's mouth fell open. Her heart hammered so hard it hurt. Her half-brother, the man who locked her father up, the man threatening them. Hannah stared at Frank, trying to understand how a family secret could turn into a weapon. And behind it all was that envelope, sealed and waiting. Frank squeezed her hand. "He wants it," he whispered, "because it can destroy him, or save him. I don't know any more." Hannah's voice shook. "Then we open it," she said. Frank flinched. "Not yet," he whispered, fear flooding back. "Not until we know he can't take it from you." Hannah looked toward the hospital hallway, where footsteps echoed, and she realized Frank was right, because Grant Holloway wasn't done. He had dropped the word "me" in that office on purpose. He had just lit the fuse, and Hannah could feel the explosion coming. The next week became a tight rope of paperwork, fear, and small victories. Detective Caldwell worked with the Erie County prosecutor to get emergency orders in place. Marisol helped Hannah file for temporary guardianship so no one could shove documents at Frank while he was weak. The hospital flagged Frank's room for extra security. A guard checked IDs. Nurses were told politely but firmly that no advisor was welcome. Still, Hannah jumped at every knock. One evening, Hannah drove to the Erie County Legal Aid office in Sandusky, the one tucked between a tire shop and a cheap insurance place. The waiting room was packed with people holding folders like armor. A lawyer named Denise Porter listened with narrowed eyes as Hannah described lakefront asset solutions. When Hannah said Howard Holloway, Denise's face tightened. "That name's been whispered for years," she said. "People were scared to testify. They still are. But if you have witnesses and video, that's different." Denise helped Hannah request property records and compare signatures. They found mistakes, dates that didn't match Frank's routine, initials Frank never used, a notary stamp tied to an employee connected to Lakefront. It wasn't proof by itself, but it was a thread, and Hannah was done letting predators pull threads out of her father's life. That night, Hannah sat beside Frank's bed and placed the envelope between them. Frank stared at it like it could bite. "I kept it because your mom made me promise," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." Hannah swallowed hard. "Dad," she said gently, "you can't protect me from the truth forever." Frank's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared of what it does to you," he whispered. Hannah reached for his hand. "I'm more scared of what happens if we keep letting him control the story," she said. Frank nodded, slow and heavy. Hannah carefully peeled the tape and opened the letter. The paper inside was folded and worn. Her mother's handwriting hit her like a wave. For a second, the hospital room smelled like that old year. Bleach, plastic curtains, and the perfume her mom wore to feel human. Hannah read aloud, voice shaking. Her mother wrote about love and dignity, about how adults sometimes make terrible choices because they think they're saving their family. Then the letter turned darker. It named a woman from years ago, Lila. It described a bruised young mother who showed up at church with a little boy. It described Howard Holloway's charm, then his cruelty. And it said the thing Hannah never expected to hear in her mother's voice. That boy was Frank's. Not by marriage, not by paperwork, by blood. Hannah's throat closed. She clutched the letter to her chest and cried without sound. Frank's shoulders shook as he stared at the ceiling, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried to help him. I was scared. I didn't do enough." Hannah wiped her face. "You didn't create his pain," she said, "but he's using it to hurt people." The very next morning, Caldwell called. "We're moving," he said. "Warrants are signed." By noon, officers searched Lakefront Asset Solutions and the storage unit. They seized files, computers, and bins labeled with client names. Hannah stood in the parking lot as boxes were carried out and felt something she hadn't felt since the padlock: air in her lungs. Grant Holloway was brought to the precinct in his clean coat, still trying to look calm. But when he saw Hannah holding her mother's letter in a clear evidence sleeve, something in his face finally cracked. Not anger, fear, and underneath it, a hunger that looked like grief. Caldwell interviewed him for an hour. Then he stepped out and told Hannah, "He wants to talk to you. Not alone. With me present." Hannah's stomach tightened, but she nodded. In the interview room, Grant's suit was wrinkled, his smile gone. His hands were cuffed. He stared at the letter like it was the only real thing left in the world. "That's her handwriting," he whispered. "My mother's," Hannah said. "And my father's truth." Grant's jaw trembled. "He knew," he said, "all this time." Frank entered slowly with a nurse and a guard supporting him, still bruised, still thin, but standing. His eyes were steady. "I didn't know at first," Frank rasped. "And when I did, I was scared. I'm sorry." Grant looked at Frank like he was seeing a ghost. "You had a family," he said bitterly. "You had a house. I had bruises and threats and a man telling me love was something you earned." Hannah leaned forward. "And now you've been telling seniors the same thing," she said. "Sign or suffer. That's not survival. That's cruelty." Grant's eyes filled suddenly. He wiped at them like he hated the weakness. "I didn't want to be him," he whispered. "But I became him." Frank's voice was quiet. "Then stop," he said. "Stop now." Grant's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him in a way that looked almost like relief. "The rings," he whispered. "They're in my desk. The rest is in the storage unit. I'll tell you everything. I'll give names." Caldwell watched him carefully. "You'll cooperate fully," he said. Grant nodded once. "Yes," he whispered. Then he looked at Frank, and his voice cracked. "I hated you," he admitted. "And I hated myself for wanting you." Frank swallowed hard. "I can't erase what you lived through," he said. "But I can tell you the truth. And you can still choose who you become." Grant's eyes squeezed shut. A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't reach for Frank's hand, but he didn't pull away when Frank rested a shaking palm on the table near him, close enough to be a bridge. Over the next months, justice moved the way it usually does, slow and imperfect, but real. Charges were filed. Other victims came forward. Some money was recovered. Items were returned. Frank's home was protected through county services and legal aid, and Hannah changed the locks and installed a simple camera by the porch. Frank started therapy through a local senior program, sitting with a counselor and learning to say out loud the words he'd swallowed for years. "I was afraid. I was ashamed. I needed help." On a bright cold Saturday weeks later, Hannah took him to Rosie's place. Frank shuffled in with a cane, cheeks still hollow but eyes clearer. Rosie slid a plate of pancakes in front of him and said, "Good to see you, Frank." Frank looked at Hannah and smiled. Small but real. "Good to be seen," he said. Hannah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. Frank nodded. "I know," he said. "And I'm still here too. If this story hit you in the chest, do something small but powerful. Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe. Because the more we shine light on elder abuse, the harder it is for it to hide behind suits and paperwork. And stay close. because the next story starts with a quiet knock on a different door and a secret nobody was ready to face.